Okay, so here we are, Friday Night Live. I always have a hard time knowing what I'm going to talk about, and sometimes I don't get that figured out until just before I get online. So I was talking to my grandchildren a little while ago and go like, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. For some reason, they seem to be obsessed with Valentine's Day this year. So the 9-year-old grandson said, "Oh, you should talk about Valentine's Day." Like, I don't even understand why you're thinking about it. So I'm going to talk about Valentine's Day, but from the perspective of how do you take care of the people that you care most about if the worst case scenario happens, if something were to happen to you. And I'm bringing this over from a class that I taught earlier this week, and that was all about federal survivor and death benefits. And I talked in that class about what kind of things you can do to make sure that your family usually is taken care of if something happens to you. Now, when it comes to leaving benefits, it doesn't have to be to your family. You can leave them to anyone of your choosing, or even a charity or a trust or something like that. But usually, when we think about passing away, we worry about how will our family get by? Like, how are we going to take care of them? So that's really the focus. And I'm like, okay, well, that will fit in line with Valentine's Day. I don't know that he would believe me or agree with that, so don't mention it to him. But that's what I thought we would talk about as adults anyway. The subtopics that I cover in that class include what happens if somebody passes away while they're still employed, and what happens if they pass away at work, because those can be two very different things. If someone dies at work and it's an on the job related injury that causes that death, then of course there are benefits that are payable from the Department of Labor's Workers' Compensation Program. And under the federal piece of that, it's called FECA, or the Federal Employees Compensation Act. I'm not going to get too much into that tonight. Luckily, we don't have that happen on a large scale, so there's not a lot of that I want to cover there. But we do have something that's available to spouses and dependent children if a federal employee passes away, not necessarily at work, but while they're still employed by the federal government. And it's pretty surprising to most people when I talk about it in class. So I figured that would be something that would be worth sharing with you on one of the Friday Night Lives. We also have something that is available to a limited number of employees, and that's the public safety officer's benefit. If we have someone that is a federal firefighter or a law enforcement officer or a customs and border protection officer or a probation and parole officer, someone of that nature, if they do die in the line of duty, there's an additional benefit that's payable to their family members that isn't available to anyone else. We also have the ability, it's optional, to sign up for the Federal Employees Group Life Insurance, or FEGLI. And if we do, obviously that benefit is available to our family members as well. And that can look a little bit different if we pass away while we're still working versus if we pass away after we retire, because when we retire, we choose. There's a form that we need to complete, and that form is going to tell the Office of Personnel Management what we want to carry into retirement for life insurance and what we're willing to pay for. So we'll decide whether the value of that policy is going to stay at the same level it was while we were working, or are we going to have it reduce? We have the choices of having it reduce depending on what we're talking about, down to 50%, down to 25%, or maybe going all the way to zero, again, depending on exactly what we're talking about. I did want to talk tonight not only about the things that are available, but also really get on a soapbox and urge you to check any designated beneficiary forms that you may have forgotten that you filled out. Maybe you did it a long time ago when you first came to work and things have happened in your life. We get married, we get divorced, just a whole bunch of stuff happens. And we, a lot of times, don't think about going back and updating those designated beneficiary forms, which is unfortunate because that sometimes means that when a person passes away, their family is left in a really bad situation. And many times they don't even know where to start. I get calls from family members quite frequently where they've contacted someone at the agency who was a friend of their spouses, and now their spouse has passed away. And the person that they call will say, "Well, let's call Debbie. Let's see what she has to say," because they're at a loss. They don't even know where to start. So, where I want to start is by telling you that if you're a federal employee, there are three potential uh, buckets that you're contributing money to right now. And each of these buckets has the potential to be left to someone else. So, on the screen that I have up here, the little slide there, you can see first your federal retirement. It doesn't matter whether you are under the old system, CSRS, or the new system, FERS. We contribute money to a trust fund that's managed by the Office of Personnel Management. And that trust fund is called the Civil Service Retirement and Disability Fund. That's money that will go to fund our pension at the end of our career, but that's also money that we have contributed towards that pension. So if we don't make it to retirement, or if we do, but we don't live very long after we retire, and there's still money in that trust fund, we can choose who to give that to by doing a designated beneficiary form. And again, I'll show you the forms in a minute and talk about what if you didn't do the paperwork, who's going to get the money and whatnot. But next to the trust fund, what I've given you tonight is the rate that you are paying in there out of your normal biweekly paycheck if you're a FERS person. Now, if you're a CSRS person, the old system, what you contribute is 7% of your biweekly paycheck. 7%. Under FERS, it depends on when you became a federal civilian employee for the first time. If you were hired into civil service before 2013, then you contribute 0.8% of each of your paychecks into that trust fund. If you were hired in calendar year 2013, then what you have to contribute is 3.1% of your biweekly paycheck. And if you were hired after 2013, you contribute 4.4% of your biweekly paycheck. It's coming out automatically. If you are a special provision employee under law enforcement, firefighting, or air traffic control, above the rates that I just stated, you pay another 0.5 every 2 weeks. So that's going to range between 1.3 and 4.9 if you're under special provisions. In addition to paying into retirement, we pay into Social Security in the form of a payroll tax that's called OASDI, or Old Age Survivor and Disability Insurance. That tax equals 6.2% of each of our paychecks, but up to a certain amount of earnings, which changes each year. So you can see the maximum earnings there, and I'm not going to get too much into Social Security tonight, so I'm not going to talk too much about that. Just wanted you to know that that is one thing that you're paying into, and it is one thing that can be available to your surviving spouse or to any dependent children if you pass away. Additionally, we do have our TSP, the Thrift Savings Program, which functions kind of like a 401k. And we put money in there, the government puts money in there. We can choose who to leave that pot of money to by doing a designated beneficiary, and or if we don't, we go through this list to determine who's going to get the money. The same thing we did with that top box. So a lot of times federal employees will go, well, how much do I have in that top box, Debbie? When I look at my leave and earnings statement, I see this thing that says cumulative retirement or something kind of like that, because all of our agencies are a little bit different. So the one that's up here right now is a leave and earnings statement from Department of Defense. A lot of my clients work for DoD. Block 19 does say cumulative retirement. But again, they're all different. So if I'm working for the USDA, it actually shows me the cumulative amount, but it says this appointment. I like that so much better. I like that so much better because the cumulative amount isn't necessarily the full amount that we have contributed to the trust fund. It is what we have contributed to the trust fund under our current payroll office. When we change payroll, or when the agency does, then that cumulative number starts back at zero. Doesn't mean our money's gone. It means that it's not being tracked on our leave and earnings statement anymore. It happened to me twice when I was a federal employee. Once, when the Air Force decided that they were going to leave the local payroll office and start utilizing DFAS. DFAS is only tracking DFAS information. So when I got a new LES under that new payroll office, it did say zero. And I started again, I paid my 0.8. Then I left that agency and I went to work for the Department of Veterans Affairs. It's a different payroll office. That payroll office is only tracking that payroll office's stuff. So my number went back to zero. So I want you to be aware that if you have had different payroll offices because you've moved around or because your agency changed something, then what's showing on your current pay stub is only part of the story. The rest of the story is held by the Office of Personnel Management. And when we retire, they'll tell us how much is in there. Until then, we do know that that is a pot of money that belongs to us. We don't get it until we retire, and then we get it in the form of a retirement check where a little bit of money is coming back. We can think of that as a refund. It's coming out of that box. So every month that we draw a retirement check, the amount that we have in there is going down a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. If we've been retired for a long time, then maybe we got all of our money back. If we retired and we decided to leave our spouse a survivor benefit, then we got a monthly check, and after we die, our spouse got a monthly check too. So if they've been collecting for a long time, they're getting a little bit, a little bit, a little bit. The box is going down. If they live for a long time, there might not be anything left in there by the time both of us pass away. But if that doesn't happen, if I pass away, maybe I didn't have a spouse, or maybe I did, but my spouse didn't live very long, and there's still money in there, that can be left to someone else. Now, I'm going to get to choose who. Hey, Trisha, I'm so glad to see you pop in here. I get to choose who by filling out a designated beneficiary form. You have maybe 4 pots of money that will be distributed when something happens to you if you're a federal employee. The first one is that trust fund that we were just talking about. The second one is something called unpaid compensation, which is just miscellaneous money that the government could owe you for any number of reasons. You work a couple of days, you haven't gotten that paycheck yet, you die, but you have some vacation on the books, or there's an outstanding travel voucher that's payable to you. Any kind of miscellaneous stuff is unpaid compensation. So that's number 2. Number 3 is the federal employees group life insurance if you're enrolled in it. We know that many employees are, but not all of them. And then the 4th one is that TSP. So when we talk about who I'm going to leave that trust fund money to, if I retire, I decide whether I'm going to leave a survivor benefit or not. That's only for my spouse. If I do leave a survivor benefit, then I pay money while I'm living, and when I die, my spouse gets money. So they're not going to get a cash out of the trust fund, because they're going to get money every single month. If I wasn't married, but I left something that's called an insurable interest survivor benefit, then again, no one's going to be cashed out because somebody is entitled to get money every month. So if they get it monthly, then it stays in the trust fund and they're getting that little bit. And that's for the rest of their lives, potentially. There's a lot that goes into that. But if there isn't anyone that's eligible for a monthly benefit, then someone is eligible to get the lump sum of money that I have in that trust fund. And I will choose who by filling out a designated beneficiary form. There's one if I'm CSRS, and there's a different one if I'm FERS. So you can see that 2808 up there on the slide if you're under the old retirement system, and it's a 3102 if you're under the new retirement system. The problem is that we don't pay attention to that paperwork. We don't know if we filled it out a lot of times. So we, Federal Human Resources Benefits Officers, will go through a priority listing to figure out who to give the money to. And you can see that on the bottom of the slide that's up there on your screen. Number one is the designated beneficiary. Whatever you put on there, that takes precedence. But if you haven't completed that, then in the number 2 spot, we would give everything to your surviving widow or widower. If you aren't married, then we would give everything to your child or to your children in equal shares. They don't have to be dependent children. They can be adult married kids. If you don't have any kids, we would look to see if your parents were still living, and if so, we would give them the money. If your parents aren't still living, then we look for a will. This is surprising to a lot of my students, and it was to me too the first time I read it, because I assumed that a will would take care of everything. It doesn't. It's in the number 5 spot. So if you want your will to be what they use to distribute your money, you've got to do your designated beneficiary forms. And you can identify your will, or you could identify your trust. But if you don't do the designated beneficiary forms, that will is down there at number 5. That's super important for you to know about. Okay, so those 2 forms that I've mentioned here, the 2808 and the 3102, are for that trust fund money. There's a different one for that unpaid compensation if you have that on the books when you pass away, and that's as standard form 1152. All of these forms can be found at opm.gov. You fill them out. They do have to be witnessed by 2 people that aren't listed as designated beneficiaries themselves, but they don't have to be notarized. For your TSP, that is a TSP Form 3, and then for your life insurance, it is a 2818. But another thing that I want to mention, and I'll be brief. I know we're coming up on my 20 minutes, and I do try to stick to that. If a federal employee passes away while they're still employed by the government, and they don't have to be at work, or again, we may have that workers' comp thing, that FICA stuff I mentioned previously, if that's the case. For my public safety officers, there's an additional benefit payable called the Public Safety Officers Benefit, administered by the Department of Justice for all of our public safety officers, and this does require death in the line of duty. You can see that is $370,376 this year. More information available by going onto the Department of Justice website and just typing in there Public Safety Officers Benefit, or you can do a Google search for that and bring it up for yourself as well. Again, firefighters, law enforcement, public safety officers. But for everybody that's working for the federal government, if they die while still employed and they're married, there is a benefit that's payable to their spouse directly from the federal government. Under CSRS, that old system, it's a monthly benefit calculated by essentially pretending that the person didn't die today, but they simply retired. If they retired, what is their retirement benefit? And 55% of whatever that is what would be given to the spouse monthly. If you're under FERS, and federal employees that have come into the government from 1983 through today are, then we start out with a lump sum payment. The lump sum payment does change annually. For 2021. It equals $35,214.93. And the surviving spouse can choose to take that money as a single lump sum payment or spread it out in monthly payments for the next 3 years, whichever they prefer. They also get a payment that equals 50% of the employee's final annual pay or 50% of their high three average salary, whichever is greater. Take it as a single payment, monthly payments for the next 3 years, up to them. The federal employee only had to have 18 months of creditable service before they passed for those two lump sums to be payable. If, before this person dies, they have 10 years or more of creditable service, then in addition to the lump sum payments, the spouse would also receive a monthly benefit. And here we treat it just like we did that CSRS. We go, hey, let's just pretend the person didn't pass today, but they retired. What would their retirement benefit be? And we would give the first surviving spouse 50% of whatever that retirement would have been, whereas for CSRS, it was 55% of whatever the retirement would have been. If, when this person dies, they also had dependent children, the kids are potentially eligible for monthly benefits from the Office of Personnel Management. You can see the amounts showing there on the bottom of the screen, but I want to say this. Dependent children are also eligible for money from Social Security. And before they receive this benefit, we have to subtract any Social Security that they're eligible for. Quite typically, that Social Security benefit is going to be significant enough that it would completely negate this benefit. They would get it only if it was more than Social Security or if there was a difference between the two. That's highly unlikely. So there we have it. We can call it Valentine's. That's what I'm going to tell my grandson that I talked to you about. And it is definitely talking about taking care of people that you care about. I hope that it's helpful. It's not the happiest of topics to cover, but it's a really important one. Trisha, I'm so glad you were here. I can see that there are 9 other people listening in, so that's awesome. If you have questions, type them in. Let me know. You have comments, if you have personal experience with something like this, type them in, let me know. And if you're watching it on the replay, let me know that you were here as well. I really appreciate it. I will hop back on here next Friday, which is the 13th. Is it the 13th? I don't know what the date's going to be. I have to look at it. But anyway, next Friday, Friday Night Live, you've got topics. Let me know what to talk about. Trisha, please do. And let me know if you have any questions once you do watch the replay. Thanks, everyone. Take care.